Okay, I have to start this video over again. This is about the Palace Arms. Now the Palace Arms, as you know, will become an upscale residential commercial area. I believe Kevin Dingle, one of the original Palace Arms tenants, is still there. But this is about some of the strange and unusual people that lived at the palace. This is what this video is still about. The first one I have to talk about is a guy named J.H. He was a Scottish man at the time. This is about 22 years ago. The guy was about 68 years of age. One day about 20 years ago, Frank Jarvis, who was working at the front desk, waves me into the office and, "Sean, I just seen this guy, Jim in 48. He just showed me his bank book. He's got $302,000 in his bank account." And I'm wondering, and he's staying at the Palace Arms? That was unusual that a guy had that kind of money staying at the Palace Arms, a rooming house. Jim would probably be dead now. He was about 68, and that's about 22 years ago. He was in bad health then, so it's highly unlikely he is living, and he made it clear that he had no relationship with his son. Number two would be TK. When TK first came in, he was nailed for, he was of the criminal element. York Regional Police were doing an investigation about him about plywood being stolen off construction sites. Apparently TK and his buddy Eddie were going around and stealing plywood off construction sites and reselling it to a buyer that they had already lined up. This is not where the story gets weird. So TK does some jail time, and then the next time he comes back to the Palace Arms, he gets involved in dealing crystal meth out of the back of room 72, which wasn't a wise idea, because what he didn't realize is that the backyard of some of these homeowners was facing the parking lot of the Palace Arms. I'm pretty sure that somebody made a phone call in about the traffic that was basically in that area. That's my opinion. Number three would be about a guy named Ozzy. That was his nickname. He went by the initials DB, or SB. But who knows what his real name was. He basically thought it was okay to rat out drug dealers in the neighborhood. This is not a wise thing to do. And then he basically wanted to brag that he was a paid informant. You could get yourself hurt doing that. And as one cop said, though, he might have been delusional, because the cop said that 85% of the information that he gave was basically BS, and that 15% the cops could use. It's believed that this guy had some form of mental illness, and he once sent a letter to Kevin Dingle, who's still living there, saying that if he goes up on Queen and Bathurst, the Hells Angels have a hit out on him. So this is the kind of ridiculous BS that this guy spewed. So he was definitely one guy. Number four was an individual that stayed across from me, a black guy that worked in a slaughterhouse. He had a very eerie feeling to him whenever you looked this guy in the eye. There's just a bad vibe from this guy. One of the incidents he got involved with at the palace was he brought a hooker in from Strawn House. The hooker didn't get paid for the services that she wanted. The services that are oral sex or whatever. So she went down to the payphone, phoned the cops in, and said this guy had a gun. At 1 a.m. in the morning, there's all these fucking cops around my door on a gun charge, which turned out to be false. And the only thing this guy had was a paring knife. But the interesting thing about this whole story is that around 3 years down the road, the same individual was charged with a homicide. I believe he killed an old man in the King and Cowan area in the west end of Toronto. And that's the thing I'll remember about that. Number five is there have been deaths in room. There were 3 suicides by hanging, and there were numerous people, a few people that died of ODs. When I was there was actually about 10 people found dead in rooms, but only 3 were suicide, and nobody was, when I was there, was murdered at the Palace Arms. So that clears that one up. The thing about the Palace is you got to remember all these stories that I'm telling you are all true, and these are some of the characters that we had at the Palace Arms. I mean, Kevin Dingle, who stayed there a long time. We've had a lot of incidents, and the other one I remember is the case that I think it was a bunch of lies. There was a girl that used to frequent the palace. Her name was Kat. She was a native woman who was a hooker. Anyway, she had a child and all that, and she basically accused some guy that was living at the palace of being a pedophile because he did some unwanted things around her kids. That was the accusations that she said, and it was while she was getting on a streetcar. Anyways, one day Frank Jarvis is minding the kid in the office. This is going way back. This has got to be like the late 90s. And I'm walking by the office, about 6 feet by the office, and Frank Jarvis said this guy made some unwanted things he did towards the kid, like felt his private parts or whatever in front of the kid. I don't know if this is true or false to this day. I still don't know. But he dragged me into the court case saying that I seen it. Well, that was BS because I was about 6 feet behind the guy and I was walking by the office, did a quick glance and walked down the side corridor. So I really didn't see anything. But I got dragged into the case, and to this day, the guy got off. But to this day, I think it was all a bunch of BS. In fact, the reason why I think so is because Kat, the sugar daddy, Frank Jarvis' little girl, the hooker, did not show up for court. That tells me it was BS. If this was really, really true, she would have shown up for court. But she was a no-show in court, so that tells me this might have been made up. And maybe this guy gave the kid a little bit too much of a glance. I don't know, but it seemed like it was made up information. And that's the one I remember too. You know, there's been a lot of, there was one guy in 27 that I can't explain, had a lot of pairs of running shoes, whether they were stolen or not, but he had like a large amount of shoes in his room. And that was one that I'll always remember too. You know, now that the palace is no longer a rooming house, it should be interesting to see how that place functions. And as I said, the one interesting thing is that here we are like in late July, and I believe there's still 4 tenants that lived at the palace before the documentation was signed. They were living there when the documentation was signed, and they're still living there. So I don't know if the new owners how long it's going to take to get them out, but I went by, I think it was in May, and they were renting office spaces at the Palace Arms. So that was, that tells me that they're trying to get some movement going. You know, there's been a lot of unusual individuals. Another case that I have to look at was when the owner, Harold Milne, was there one day. There was a guy that rented room 47. So Harold didn't want these women going into the room. So one day, this guy walks out of the room dressed up as a woman. So Harold said, "Give this guy a note. There's no women allowed in the room." One tenant said, "Well, Harold, that's not the case. This guy that rented the room actually dresses up as a woman." So he went in his room and dressed up as a woman and came out. Harold thought that it was a woman going into a room, but the guy liked to dress up as a woman. That was in room 47. That was kind of strange. So there's been a lot of interesting cases, you know. One of the, guys that have left ferrets behind, and animal control had to be called in to catch a ferret. Was kind of an unusual thing. The sad thing about the guy that committed suicide by climbing up on top of the building at 9:38, I believe the guy was from either Iraq or Iran, and jumped head first down into the laneway and committed suicide. Some say he was in the war, Iraq-Iran war. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I heard. I know he was drinking alcohol that night, and maybe that was to lessen the pain, but he jumped off the building and committed suicide. That was one of the things. And a lot of individuals like this guy Adrian, who used to climb up on the roof and start jumping up and down. And one of the things I remember is once the cops came to chase this Adrian guy, his nickname was Legend, they wouldn't climb up on the roof. They were just, it was too risky. They had to get the fire department in. I actually made that climb up onto the roof. I'm not as good at these athletic things now as I used to be, but I remember doing that. And that's basically all I have to say for today, and that's about the memories of some of the people that stayed at the Palace Arms. And yeah, it's just probably the last thing I talk about. I mean, in the future I will do a video on Don Mayette and some of the stunts that he pulled at the Palace Arms, and that might be in around 2019-20, but this will be probably my second last video about the Palace Arms, so thank you.